Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to the Big Blue View YouTube channel. I'm your host, Ed Valentine of Big Blue View, and joining me today as we sort of wrap up New York Giants draft weekend, joining me today is good friend Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants and Giants Country. Patty, how you doing? And hope you're recuperating from draft weekend.
It's a long 3 days, but you know what? We finally get answers. We finally start to see what the vision is. And it's always interesting. We may not agree with everything that's done, but nonetheless, it's always interesting to see how it plays out.
Yes, it is. And Patty, for folks that watch you and I on a regular basis, they know what they're in for here. They know that basically they're in for the Ed and Patty variety show or comedy half hour, whatever it's going to be. But it always includes
special guest, by the way,
with a special guest. Yes, put the puppy up on the screen, Patty. Come on.
She if I could, my chair is not big enough for the both of us, but she likes to sit in my lap. And right now she's sniffing down by my feet. But
Patty is the brand new owner of a brand spanking new puppy. You just had her for what? Yep, 48 hours or so now, Patty?
Got her yesterday. Today's Sunday. Yeah, we got her on Saturday.
There you go.
So we got her just before the draft. And her name's Macy. She's a Shih Tzu mix. And she's now in my office, sniffing around. What are you doing, Mace? Now she's getting real. I hope she doesn't mess with my wires here.
So if you get distracted or lose your train of thought, then we know why. We just blame the puppy. And
that's okay. She's sitting at my feet, so hopefully she'll.
There you go. All right. So we got the dog settled. Hopefully we have the viewers settled. Hopefully folks haven't run for the hills on us yet. But all right, let's get into talking about the Giants draft weekend. And Patty, we have to start for me anyway. We have to start with the biggest thing that the Giants did not do. And the biggest thing they did not do, of course, is select a quarterback at any point in the draft, specifically at number 6 overall when there was an opportunity for them to do so. Are you, as you digest it all, are you surprised that they didn't go quarterback? And how do you feel about the long-term ramifications of not addressing the position at this point?
Am I surprised? Yes. Daniel Jones's injury history, I've said it before, I'll say it again. It does worry me. Is he going to be the Daniel Jones we saw in 2022? Or are we going to see the Daniel Jones of 2023? And I just felt like, okay, if you have a quarterback, you can develop, get him ready. Next year you can move on from Jones if he tanks again. And if not, then maybe you have a situation down the line like what the 49ers had with Trey Lance, where they traded him away once Brock Purdy developed. But in thinking about it further, I'm glad Joe Schoen did not reach for a quarterback. I think that would have been a bigger disaster than not taking one. And I also thought to myself, well, we all talk about how Brian Daboll is a quarterback whisperer, how he worked wonders with Josh Allen, how he helped Tommy DeVito get ready and be a functional quarterback, how he, worked wonders with Tyrod Taylor, took him to the next level. And I got to thinking, well, what about Drew Lock? If God forbid Daniel Jones doesn't work out, Drew Lock is a former number 1 pick. I know he hasn't caught on, with Denver and with Seattle. He didn't, really win the starting job and hang on to it. But, if we're going to make the argument that, Daboll could take one of these college quarterbacks and turn them into, something special, why not? Why not use the same argument for Drew Lock?
And you can still use that argument with Daniel Jones as well, because Daniel Jones had the best year of his career in 2022 with Brian Daboll as his head coach in Daboll's first year. Things went all manner of sideways in 2023, and a lot of that had to do with really pitiful offensive line play, which the worst offensive line play that the Giants had was in the first 5 or 6 games when Jones was under center. They got incrementally better as the season went along. I think with Tyrod Taylor and Tommy DeVito, that played a little bit better, offensive line wise. But so a quarterback was never going to turn that Giants offense into a good offense last year, considering the circumstances. What was disappointing was just how discombobulated Jones looked, in the time that he was playing. You would have hoped that he would have handled, some of that disarray a little better and risen above it a little bit better. Didn't happen. Gets another chance in 2024, and we'll see how it goes. But, to your point, it could still happen with Daniel Jones as well. And I'm sure the Giants are crossing their fingers that it does.
I mean, I am too. Don't get me wrong. I know I've been, on the draft the quarterback bandwagon, and I still think they should have, because again, Daniel Jones's injury history really concerns me. I'm talking about the neck injuries. People will say, well, quarterbacks, Tom Brady came back from an ACL. This guy came back from a knee. This guy came back from this. Neck injuries are totally different animals. And I found it interesting that Jones revealed that what his second neck injury was a stinger, which is common in football, which you wouldn't think twice about, but he had an injury that was a little bit more significant, like 2 years prior. And if I'm not mistaken, he also had a procedure done on his neck. I don't believe it was for the same thing, but all that adding together, because remember, he had the scar on his neck and he finally admitted that he had had a procedure. Mm-hmm. So all that added together adds up to my concern for that position and for Daniel Jones, who, he shows that he wants to be tough and he doesn't quite understand yet that it's okay to come up a couple yards short and live to see another down than to try and force it and, God forbid, take a shot that's going to knock you out permanently.
What am I going to do with this, Patty? What am I going to do with this if something happens to Jones or the Giants have to move on, from the guy? What am I going to do with that?
I think you'll have to have a giveaway on your Instagram account.
I guess so. But, on a serious note, you mentioned the stinger, and I'm not downplaying a stinger at all. We've seen guys miss time with stingers. I can't remember who the linebacker was that the Giants had a few years ago who got a stinger in training camp and ended up retiring because of it.
Oh, I know who you're talking about, but I can't remember the name. I remember the situation.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was, but it's nothing to be taken lightly.
They hurt, stingers. I've had them. They can be I had to go for physical therapy for a stinger because I was having numbness down my shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to mess around with them.
Anything with the neck is not to be taken lightly. And now that said, Patty, we talked about obviously what the Giants were saying. I mean, before the draft, they said, Joe said, I'm going to let the board speak to me. And obviously what he was saying there by taking Malik Neighbors was that the Giants' evaluation was that Malik Neighbors has a better chance to be a star than any of the quarterbacks that were available to them. And yet there's still part of me that, even though they only had 6 picks, there's still part of me that is a little bit surprised, or at least thought they would think long and hard about taking a developmental guy somewhere in the middle. Just maybe somebody that could give them an option, going into 2025, as, at least as maybe not as a franchise guy, but as a placeholder while they still went out and tried to find somebody. So were you surprised they didn't do that?
I guess in retrospect, it makes sense that they didn't. They had 6 draft picks. They probably figured, okay, we have Drew Lock, we have DeVito. Dable said on the, after the draft was over, he said they're going to sign a guy to help with the spring drills. And they had a lot of needs, which Shane, said to us, when in the draft preview presser that he held. So in retrospect, if they weren't going to take a quarterback in the first 2 rounds, I started to say, okay, they're not going quarterback. They're going to address needs. And that's pretty much what they did.
It's interesting, Patty, because I wrote something at Big Blue View on Sunday. General managers always tell us that they go by their board. They let the board speak to them. They go by best player available. They don't reach for needs or draft for needs. They draft for the long term. I think when you look at Joe Shane's 3 drafts for the New York Giants, and maybe it's because of circumstance, maybe it's because of where the Giants are in terms of talent and roster build at this point. Yes, Joe Shane believes in positional value. Yes, you want value and need to match up on the draft board. But I think it's pretty clear that he sets his draft board and he uses his draft picks to address needs. I think that's absolutely clear. I think you can look at least 4 of the picks this year. You can look at several of the picks each year, especially the first 2 last year, Tay Banks and John Michael Schmitz, Evan Neal in 2022, Neighbors, Newbin, Phillips, all of these guys, to me, they're all need-based picks. So for me, I think need is a very, very important driving factor in what Joe does.
Oh, I mean, any GM who says, who denies drafting for need is probably lying. I mean, there is a degree of need. And oftentimes when value marries up with need, and I always go back and I use this example over the years, when the Giants had Eli Manning in his prime, were they really going to draft the number 1 quarterback? I mean, I don't remember all the classes and where there was, the quarterbacks classes were strong, but we all knew that they weren't going to draft the number 1 quarterback. So even if they had the highest grade on the guy, they weren't going to do it, even if they were in a position to do it. So that's when you say to yourself, okay, is it more need based? And, you can't obviously say, oh, okay, we're on the clock and, oh, we need a tight end. So let's see who the best tight ends are. Basically the Patty Traina way of drafting, where I look and say, oh, I haven't taken a tight end, so maybe we should look here. But you do marry need and value. And for me, the word value is kind of a very broad word, because when I think of value, it's what are you getting for that pick? Are you getting a guy who can also play special teams? Are you getting a guy who, can play multiple positions? That to me is how I define value. And I think that's what Joe Shane and most general managers look for.
Yeah. And I also think, as you said, value can be such a broad term, because value also has something to do with need, has something to do with what your football team, what you need to add to your football team. Patty, I want to turn to, let's talk about Malik Neighbors. Let's do that. When we did a show last week before the draft, we talked a little bit about the wide receiver class. Turned out to be a pipe dream that Marvin Harrison Jr. would fall to the Giants. That was probably really never going to happen. He was never getting past Arizona. We talked a little bit about Malik Neighbors versus Rome Odunze, and you and I both said that we liked Rome Odunze. That said, I still like Rome Odunze, but I fully understand why the Giants chose Malik Neighbors instead of Odunze, and I'm not surprised at all that they did that. Not because it was the chalk pick of the mock drafters, but knowing what Joe Shane has said about what Brian Daboll and his coaching staff want in a wide receiver, and knowing, that the Giants just needed a pure game breaker. I'm not surprised at all. So I'm curious, as you process the choice of Neighbors over Odunze, how do you land on what the Giants did there?
I don't hate the pick. I was a big Odunze fan, as you know. I was hoping they would take him, and I think you were as well. But I think at the end of the day, maybe Brian Dable saw Neighbors as being a little bit better fit for what they want to do on offense. So the pick itself, I'm glad that they didn't get cute and say, oh, we're going to trade down for more picks. I know a lot of people were saying, oh, they should trade down, get more picks. Then you miss out on a receiver. And then there's a question of if you trade too far down, and I think there was an offer from the Colts, if I'm not mistaken, to trade to swap places. And the Colts, I think, were at 15, I want to say.
15
so
or
if you're going 9
16.
spots, now you not only miss out on the receivers, you potentially miss out on, say, a Brock Bowers, who maybe makes sense to take in that range. So Joe Shane not getting cute, sticking with his board. Was it a dull draft in terms of, compared to last year when he was trading all over the place? Yes, but he only had six picks. Basically, the big trade that he made was to acquire Brian Burns. So that'll have to whet everybody's appetite until next year.
Absolutely. Patty, one thing about Neighbors, does the big personality scare you at all?
I don't know that it scares me. He's only 20 years old. I think he's going to be 21 before the start of camp. He's a kid.
Yeah.
He's a kid. I mean, compared to you and me, he's a kid. We're old enough to be his parents at this point.
Yes, we are. Don't remind me, Patty.
I know.
Don't remind
you're
me.
old enough to be his grandpa, probably. Me, not so much.
Thanks. Ouch.
But
all right. We're getting rid of you, Patty. We're taking you off the show right now. You're done. No, your guest pass has been permanently revoked after today.
You can put me in jail, right? Okay.
Yep.
But no,
you're in Big Blue View jail now.
I am in Big Blue.
All right.
But no, seriously, getting back to Neighbors, he's going to be 21, and my experience with these younger players is when they are that age, they think they have all the answers, and they don't. And they quickly learn. They either sink or they swim. So, you look at the support structure the Giants put in place for their young players, and you hope that it's good enough to where maybe a veteran comes in and takes the young players under his wings. Like I saw on X, for example, somebody made a comment about Neighbors and Darius Slayton, who now is the old man in the room. Let's face it, now with Sterling Shepard gone, he jumped in and defended him. So that's what they need. They need like a Darius Slayton to sit down with Neighbors and say, hey, this is how you be a pro. You got your skills and your talent and your methods got you here. This is what you need to do to excel and to stay here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, Patty, let's turn to the rest of the draft. And it's a good time for me to mention that I did an episode of your show, Locked On Giants, as well, which will be appearing on Locked On Giants at some point on Monday as well. And over there, we went through all of the picks and we graded each pick, and I failed miserably, but I tried. But
well, you didn't come with your hat or your red pen.
I didn't come with my hat or my pens or any of my chalkboard, or I didn't come with I wasn't prepared, so I get demerits for that. But so we're not grading picks here today, but I want to turn to day 2 and day 3, and let me ask you this. Out of the 5 remaining picks that the Giants had, out of those 5 picks, which one was your favorite?
I'm going to say Tracy, the running back.
5th round.
Value. Yep. I talked about value before. This is a guy who he's relatively new to the running back position. He doesn't have a lot of tread on his tire, but more importantly, you look at the new kickoff return rule and how kickoffs are coming back in style, much like I think bell-bottom pants, if my fashion sense is up to date. And now you've got a guy who can return kickoffs for you. You know, Gunnar Olszewski is more of a punt returner. He's not really a kickoff returner. And the big question is okay, well, what are they going to do with kickoff returners now that, this new rule is in place? Well, Tracy's a guy who can maybe do that for you. He has experience, unlike last year when they tried to shove Eric Gray into that role without much success.
There's an interesting theory with the new kickoff rule that I've seen some folks, talking about. There's an interesting theory that it's going to be more about blocking schemes and returners who can read blocks and set up blocks, more so than kickoff has always been. You get the fastest guy you can possibly get, and you try to create one hole and you try to get that guy through that hole, and then off he goes. It hasn't been about being shifty or anything. It's how fast can you hit the hole. But now it's different. So a guy with some running back experience could be really, really interesting in that role.
Absolutely. And I just think, like I said, value pick. I don't know necessarily what he's going to be able to give them on offense. There is going to be that committee. I think we can all agree on that. Devin Singletary is going to lead the committee. And then after that, who's it going to be? Is it going to be Eric Gray at number 2? Is it going to be Gary Brightwell? Is it going to be Jashawn Corbin, Dante Miller? I mean, it's going to be up for grabs. So running back is going to be one of the big competitions to watch for this summer.
Absolutely. And Tracy, just to mention quickly, kid that was a former wide receiver, converted to running back just last year. 1 year of work as a running back, really impressive year. So this is a kid with receiving skills, running skills, kickoff return skills. So interesting pick. All right, Patty. Flip side. Which pick did you? I don't want to say hate, although that's the word that's on the tip of my tongue. Which pick did you look at and say, I just don't understand that one?
That's easy. The 3rd round pick, Andrew Phillips. I don't dislike the player. I want to make that perfectly clear. What I don't understand about that pick, and maybe if I sit down and I really think about it, it'll come to me, is how Joe Shane basically said afterwards that, he's like, almost like Cordell Flott. And I'm paraphrasing here, by the way, almost like Cordell Flott in terms of, he's more of an inside guy, a slot guy with some flex to the outside. And I'm sitting here saying to myself, okay, great. You added another slot receiver who, is basically Cordell Flott too. What are you doing about cornerback too? Who's going to play there? Is it going to be Nick McLeod? You really want to take him off of special teams where he was your best guy last year, your best gunner, and move him to defense full time? Maybe that's the plan. I don't know. Nick McLeod, played well when he was pressed into action last year. So maybe they say, okay, you know what? We'll go with a different gunner there. So that's really the head scratcher for me. Not so much, that I don't think Phillips has the talent to be good in the NFL, but just why go cornerback there and get a guy, like I said, who's primarily a slot guy?
Yeah, I thought if they were going to go corner, and it made perfect sense to go corner at that spot, I thought they might go corner in round 2 instead of going safety. But they really liked what Tyler Nubin offered them, and so they chose Nubin, and then they addressed corner in round 3. I thought they would go with one of these bigger, longer guys, one of these pure outside corners, because that felt like what the defense needed. If they truly believe in Cordell Flott, then why did they draft another Cordell Flott? And why did they bother to re-sign Darnay Holmes?
Exactly. So that one was a head scratcher for me. I'm not going to lie.
Absolutely. All right, Patty. The one thing beyond quarterback that they didn't do, and I always tell people, look, in one off season, you just cannot get everything you want. You can't just say, I want one of these and one of these and one of these and one of these, and you get everything you want. You just can't do it. What's the one thing the Giants didn't do that you really wish they had done in this draft?
Defensive line depth. So they've got Raheem Nunez-Roches, who's a pretty good run stuffer. They've got Jordan Riley, who showed promise last year, but again, pretty much a run stuffer. They have DJ Davidson, who showed promise, a run stuffer primarily. Timmy Horn, who I don't know a whole lot about, but I would imagine he's a run stuffer as well. So who are you lining up next to Dexter Lawrence to help with pushing the pocket in the way that, in a way that Leonard Williams used to do? I just feel like the Giants have a lot of guys on that interior defensive line who can, play the run to varying degrees, but do they have somebody who's a legitimate pass rusher? I'm not so sure. And, unless Shane Bowen's going to work around that, which is certainly possible with the scheme, Dexter, what's going to be his role? Are you going to basically have him be a space eater, or are you going to have him try and get to the quarterback as well? I'm just curious to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I'm absolutely curious to see how Dexter Lawrence gets used as well. And I'm with you. I think everybody focused on offensive line, offensive line, offensive line. But when you think about it, the way that the Giants were structured, they were going to go wide receiver if they weren't going to go quarterback. Maybe you can say you would have been a little bit surprised they went safety at 47 in the second round. They had to address corner. They had to find a running back at some point. There were things they had to do. You can talk about offensive line, but the Giants signed 5 offensive linemen in free agency who have started games in the NFL. They signed 5 guys, and all 5 of those guys are probably not going to make the roster. I mean, John Runyon's going to be a starter. Jermaine Illuminor is going to be a starter, but Austin Schlottman, Aaron Stinney, Matt Nelson, I think is the tackle they signed from the Detroit Lions. All of those guys have started games in the NFL, but there's not going to be room on the 53-man roster for all of those guys.
And also don't forget the 2 young guys too, Azudu and McKeithen.
Azudu and McKeithen are still on the roster, and still, Joe Shane draft picks that the Giants still are invested in and believe in. So I guess it didn't surprise me that much that I would have liked, a young interior offensive lineman or a young, swing tackle as a developmental guy, but I understand it. I really, the one that worries me is, as you said, the one that worries me the most is the defensive line depth.
Yeah, but on the plus side, Andre Patterson's a pretty good defensive line coach. So if anybody can tap into the potential that he has there, he's the guy.
Yeah, and I know the Giants are still really, really high on Jordan Riley, kid they drafted in the 7th round a year ago, kid who I don't think was on anybody's radar, except for the New York Giants. And, it only takes one team. It only takes one team to see something in a guy that they want to work with. And the Giants wanted to work with Riley, and we'll see if that eventually pays off for them. Patty, last thing. We kind of learn things about Joe Shane every year as we go through this draft. I mean, what just overall thoughts about the Giants roster, where it stands now, and maybe what you feel like you've learned about Joe Shane after 3 drafts now?
I think he leans towards need a little bit more than he's willing to admit. I know a lot of GMs say, oh, best player available. And I never fully believe that. I believe that, and I can't prove this because obviously I haven't seen professional draft boards, but if you have a cluster of guys who have similar grades, 99.9% of the time, you're going to go with need. All right. Mm-hmm. So, I also think one of the things we learned about Joe Shane is, although he didn't give us any clues you really have to tune in to what he's saying and listen carefully how he phrases things, because there are little hints as to how he is thinking. If you really listen carefully and you sit back and you dissect it and say, okay, he was telling us the truth all along. For example, he talked about the quarterbacks and he said, oh, I'd be comfortable going in with, with Daniel Jones, with Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito. Well, we know that they tried to trade up, but after they weren't able to trade up, everybody thought, okay, well, he's going to go to the next quarterback on this list and see if that need and value match up. But he didn't force the pick. So that to me says, yeah, we are comfortable going in with those three, for 2024.
Yeah, the long-term question is what happens after 2024, but I guess we'll talk about that for the next 11 or 12 months, Patty.
Sure.
So, all right, Patty, thank you as always for the time, folks. If for some odd reason you ever get tired of listening to me or reading the work at Big Blue View, you can check out Patty at Locked On Giants and over at Giants Country. So it's not a bad secondary way to spend your time. Oh,
that's it. You're not seeing I was going to show you the puppy after we finished taping. So.
Oh, so I couldn't help it, Patty. I had
a
to
great
take
picture of the puppy actually sticking her tongue out. I might need to email that to you.
You might need to just put it up on the screen in front of me and just I probably deserve it.
Let me see if yeah.
Oh.
I know my lights are there, but her tongue's sticking out. So
I see it. Yeah, I deserve it. All right, Patty. Thank you very, very much. In all seriousness, thank you very, very much for spending the time. And Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.